we're going to do a follow-up webinar for everybody who signs up for the Mark course, where we're going to do Q&A. Probably spend, what, a couple hours, James,
Yeah, and
answering
I think
questions?
we might even have more than one, but we'll start with one. I'm thinking toward the end of February, give people a chance to get through the course. And yeah, I want to open it up to people. I consider people who pay the money and take the course, I consider them our students, and they deserve input. And, you know, I've taught this course for years, decades, in 3 different universities, Notre Dame, William and Mary, and UNC Charlotte. And the students get to ask questions. They have feedback. They have different approaches, backgrounds, different views. They don't always agree with me. So I want it to be that kind of experience, not just, you know, you buy the course, go online and go, oh, that's what he thinks.
Yeah.
You know, comments on YouTube, as you well know, Derek, I mean, it's not the place to address the real, I mean, there's some good questions on there, but we want to do it personally. You know, we want to really go into it. So
in depth. I'm showing people what the course actually looks like when they purchase it. There are PDFs, there are maps, there are downloadable stuff. You can get it. It's MP3. So if you're not wanting to watch, by the way, this is in 4K. I've mentioned this before, where you're actually teaching, and it's super high quality. I mean, it really is. And you're going through the entire gospel. There's 7 lectures, all in 4K. And if you just want to listen to it in audio, you can go to the bottom. It's filled with pictures, and Ryan did such a fantastic job. You can actually download the audio version of it. But I just want to make one remark here that I think is important is this is not like a credentialed thing. These are all just to help further people's educations, even though the content you're teaching is stuff that people were really in your courses at the actual college were taking.
Right.
So they get the access to it, but we're very open in saying, like, you're not going to walk away with a PhD from this. You could be prepared if you ever went to college with this kind of information. You know, I have to say that, you know what I mean?
It's an undergraduate level. That's the same kind of level and approach I would use with my college students. So
yeah, there's lecture 2, 7 lectures, just so everybody knows. And I hope people will sign up and check it out. It's full of information, great stuff. You also have the blog. Just getting through this here, you have your blog. There's so much you do. Go sign up. It's free. He'll email you on updated information. Dr. Tabor's been doing a lot of work. I'm looking forward to the Apologia video too that's coming out soon. That's going to be exciting. And he has a Patreon now. So what do you have with that? What are you planning on doing with the Patreon?
Patreon is for supporting the research projects that I do. If you go to the Patreon, it lists them all out. Everything from DNA in tombs in Jerusalem, skeletal remains at Masada, all kinds of things that essentially involve research. And that what it does for the patrons that join is it kind of brings you in on the inside. As you become partners with me, if we're going to go figure out something or do something, particularly because a lot of this would be in Israel and Jordan, you get to be participants in that with special access and information, ability to ask questions. I get 100 emails a day. Frankly, I can't answer them. But if people are willing to support the research, and I've done research for years and raised money when I was with the university for projects, then I consider donors as part of the team, so to speak, right? So they get to participate in that sense, and also access to asking questions. I don't have all of the wisdom.
Yeah.
People come up with all kinds of things that I learned from, and I've always felt that about my students. And I give people credit if I learn from them. Somebody points something out to me and I put it in an article, I'll use their names if they don't mind, and say, this was pointed out to me by so-and-so.
Dr. Tabor, just straight into the question, and then we'll get into the super chats in a little bit. Why are Christians happy to forget Mark's gospel? I titled it this. I know it's been a while since it's almost 10 minutes into this video. Why?
I don't think it's intentional, and many don't even realize it, but we've talked about the experience of very sincere, devout people wanting to read the New Testament, and how you start with Matthew and then you get to Mark and you think, oh, it's kind of like the same thing. And it does sort of seem that, because 90% of Mark is in Matthew. But we'll get to that. How is it in Matthew? Okay, then you get to maybe Luke, and it also seems like, well, I've read all this. And again, you have 80% of Mark is also in Luke. So it becomes the stepchild, sort of the marginalized, oh, I've already read that. And I've just noticed over the years, ministers, preachers, they get up in the pulpit. Very seldom would they go to Mark. If there's a key passage like picking grain on the Sabbath, or Jesus teaches in parables, or Peter's confession, people prefer Matthew. It's the church's gospel. It's the most developed. You might realize it's the only one that uses the word church twice, so, and then the Great Commission at the end, go into all the world and preach the gospel and baptize people in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. I mean, that's the King James, Holy Spirit. You can see why it's just regal. It's out there. And then Luke is more supposedly the plotting historian that gives you all the facts that weren't in Matthew. Well, what happened to Mark? Oh, well, Mark, like, we have it. But it turns out you don't. So I don't think it's that part isn't conscious. But where it gets conscious is if you realize it is the earliest Jesus story. It's the first. It's the first time we ever get. Paul didn't give us a Jesus story. He hardly gives us, he's born of a woman, crucified, died, and buried, and raised the third day. I just gave you Paul's gospel. He says that's his gospel. And he didn't even say born of a woman in 1 Corinthians 15. So he didn't give us the Jesus story. What does he allude to? Maybe one or two teachings of Jesus. It's more blessed to give than receive. And the thing about divorce, maybe a couple more. Thief in the night for the return of the Messiah. So what's the story is the question when you read Mark. And if you pull it out like this, here's what you get. These are my notes, but this is what you get in the course. You say, well, I don't need a copy of Mark. I got it in my Bible. But take it out of the Bible. All of a sudden, here's the Jesus story. Empty your head of anything you know. Say, well, I want to read about Bethlehem and the wise men and the angels and the shepherds at the birth of Jesus. Let's see. No birth of Jesus in Mark. Oh, I love it when they visit the empty tomb and the women come and Mary Magdalene has her special vision, and then Peter and John run to the tomb, and later Jesus appears that day, and a week later again, and this is it. This is the climax of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Turn to the last page of this. And they fled from the tomb. Fear and trembling had come upon them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Well, clearly that's not a satisfactory ending. So, people go, well, maybe the last page was lost. And did you know there are four endings. One of them is so spurious, it's only in late medieval manuscripts. Like, they went forth and preached the glorious gospel east and west, and the Lord blessed them, or something like that. After it said, they said nothing.
Just to probe on the ending there, Mark. Yeah. Is it telling to you that there's so many different endings? Does that speak volumes in academic circles? Meaning the fact that there's many different endings that don't even agree, they've made up different endings. Is that evident to the academics that, hold on, this gives weight to the idea that there really wasn't this ending? And
absolutely,
you would imagine one ending that they shared in the community, not so many different kinds floating around, right?
That's right. The ending was unsatisfactory, I think, pretty early on. But remember, Mark is being overwritten by Matthew and Luke, so you don't have to really worry about it. See, this is partly a mental thing. You say, tell me about the birth of Jesus. You don't go to Mark. Tell me about the empty tomb and the appearances of the apostles that proves Jesus was raised. You don't need to go to Mark, because you've got all the other stuff in your head. But if you pull this out and read Mark as Mark, you're getting the first story, the earliest story. Now, whoever wrote it, and that traditionally it's been attributed to John Mark, who's mentioned in the book of Acts, and it's supposed to have to do with Peter. And we don't get into that much, because I want you to I don't think those are likely attributions, but let's just say the author of what we call Mark, what he does is give you a story that to him is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, I know in verse 1 it says Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and I would give that a C rating. You know, I kind of like the A, B, C, D, E, F on texts. That reading, if you look at the manuscripts, I think Metzger gives it a C, meaning it's not real strong. It probably didn't say the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It probably just said the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, if that is the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the author said this is the gospel, then what would happen if you just heard that story? And the reason it was forgotten and lost is partly that it's overwritten by these others. But I don't think that these gospel writers liked Mark. In other words, I don't think the person who wrote Matthew liked Mark. I'm not going to go so much strong as to say they hated it, but if you push me, I might, depending on what you mean by hate, like love less, definitely love less. Yeah. But they did not think it was adequate for their times as they were presenting their version of the gospel. But they needed it desperately because it's the core story. It's the only story that we really have. It's the early story of Jesus.
Right.
So, but what they do time after time is they overwrite it and rewrite it, almost like a painting. And you come along and start adding things to the master, thinking, well, I don't like the way this is or that is. And I can show you, you know, we'll talk about a few of them today, time and time again, where this happens. The most controversial, if you just want to jump into one, is Mark 8, the confession of Peter of Jesus as the Christ. Well, everybody in their head has, blessed are you, Peter. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I made the astounding statement in the course that it was a false confession. And I did it partly to provoke people to think. I do it in my classes, but I'm not just being cute with that. Right. I do think it was a false confession, because if you confess someone is the Messiah, but your idea of the Messiah is completely different and even opposite of the real idea that Jesus had, right, then your confession is, quote, false. And if you really want to be, you know, strong with it, it's from Satan. And that's what Jesus says. He says to Peter, when Peter objects to the suffering servant idea of Messiah, and Peter goes, and he doesn't just object. It says he rebuked Jesus. He took Jesus aside and told him off. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think rebuke is a strong word. He rebuked him. You know, I'm not going to act it for you, but I figure he said something like, you'll be Jesus and I'll be Peter. I'll say, Derek, or Jesus, what are you talking about? No way. That is not. I said, you're the Messiah. We're going to go to Jerusalem. We're going to take over Herod's temple. We're going to set up the thrones for the, you know, and so forth. Yeah. And Jesus just says, you know, get behind me, Satan. Now, Matthew is the one that has the blessing. Mark doesn't have any blessing of Peter. In fact, Peter never understands anything. In Mark, the disciples never understand anything about Jesus, ever. The last time we see them is the Garden of Gethsemane, and it says they all forsook him and fled. That's it. Curtain down on the disciples. Mm. But as we go through, you see that there are other people who did understand, and Mark becomes a test for you, the reader. Are you going to be like the apostles who miss it? Or are you going to be on the inside? Now, guess what Luke does with that same passage? He just takes out the whole rebuke of Peter. And the thing about get behind me, he just takes it out. This is typical of Luke. When Luke doesn't like something, he just removes it. Rather than rewrite it or overwrite it, just don't put it in. You know, two solutions. But what if you read Mark as Mark chapter 8? Then you find that he begins to teach them something that they didn't get. But are you going to get it as a reader? And it's not just like, oh, yeah, okay, Jesus suffers. Well, that's obvious. He says that. But what does that imply about a lot of other things that come out as you go on through? So we take you through that in the course.
Yeah, oh man, I think it's very valuable to understand Mark as Mark. And this is your point in the course. And I have never, even when I recorded, because for those who know, I go and I travel, I'll visit scholars, I do interviews. Paula Fredrickson, we didn't do a course, but we did interviews. And I've been doing courses as well with these academics, in getting front row seat to learning these things from the scholars who are teaching this in the colleges. I'm blown away when I hear it. I'm like, oh, wow, I've never done that myself. And I have a different, like I have a real deep appreciation for Mark as Mark. And then it really creates an interesting drama when you go to compare it. And then you start going, what is going on here? We had a lot of crap come up in the comment sections. I say crap because a lot of it was very triggered, you could see. When you made the point that Peter, false confession from Satan, and they're like, are you kidding me? No. We're going to probably dive deeper into that.
Well, let's try this one. What's the purpose of the parables? I learned in Sunday school, I grew up as a Christian. Jesus taught the parables to help the people understand. Well, I've got my Bible right here. Let me read you what Jesus says in Mark. He says, to you has been given the secret of the kingdom. Now he's talking to the disciples privately. Now, you, the reader, have to figure out what the secret of the kingdom is. He doesn't say. He says, I've given it to you. But he says to the rest, the crowds outside, it's in parables, that they may indeed see but not perceive, may indeed hear but not understand, lest they should turn again and be forgiven. What kind of an image of Jesus is this?
Yeah.
Why are you speaking in parable? Means a riddle, really. I'm giving you a puzzle. Now, as you go through, you're going to see 4 other times Jesus says, do you hear? Do you see? Do you understand? To the disciples. And they don't each time. And he starts rebuking them. And it gets so strong that by chapter 8, he says, are you ever going to understand anything? But as you're reading it, you're getting the inside story of him meeting with them privately and explaining it, and they don't get it. So do you see where that puts you, the reader? This is what Mark's doing. He's pulling you in very dramatically, and you're going, oh, they didn't get it. And you got to almost ask, but did I get it? Like,
right.
I thought what they said might have been okay. He's the Christ, right? I mean, what was wrong with that? So you begin to see more and more the mystery of it. And remember, the identity of Jesus is not even known in Mark. You talk about overwriting a gospel. You're going to write a gospel, and people aren't going to know who he is until the very end. That's when it's revealed publicly by a Roman centurion when he's dead on the cross. But if you go to Matthew and Luke, you know who Jesus is from the first chapter. Like with the full-blown glory, hallelujah. Angels singing at his birth, wise men visiting in Matthew, a virgin girl being pregnant without a man. I mean, man, this guy's going to be something. You open up Mark. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
My favorite verse in Mark is the very entrance of Jesus. It's the introduction of Jesus. This is Jesus, first time he's mentioned in Mark, other than the title, which I'm not counting. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Now, see, today people read that, oh, Jesus, you mean the main guy, the guy that's going to do that? It doesn't say it. It just says a guy named Jesus came. Maybe he's a minor character. How do you know that he's not a minor character in that verse? It says John's baptizing crowds of people, and in those days, Jesus came and was baptized. You say, well, God announced it. Not in Mark. He did not announce it in Mark. That's Matthew, loudspeaker. This is my beloved son. If you put that into Mark, you just say, this is incoherent.
Yeah, just to emphasize the point that you're saying is in Mark, in the Greek, he's talking directly. It's almost like he's whispering it to Jesus. I'm not going to use the word whisper because it doesn't say that. The point is, the only person who's hearing it,
Jesus heard
is
it.
Jesus.
It's a self-revelation.
Right. Self-revelation.
And it goes on through like that. So throughout the course, we point those things out, and it puts you, the reader, on guard and kind of tests you whether you're going to get it or not. And at one point, Mark even says, let the reader understand. So he has you, the reader, in mind. So when you take this course, you're really participating in what Mark liked to do.